But then there were things about the workplace that they were concerned about. They were concerned about the amount of outsourcing and the fact that their jobs were being lost elsewhere in the world. They were concerned about technology. I spoke to one lady who said that in the factory that she worked in, there had been 300 jobs about 2 or 3 years before. There were now 30, and those 30 jobs were going to go. And they were scared about what the digital revolution was going to mean for them. And they were worried about globalization. They were worried that cheaper goods coming into the UK, more open boundaries, were going to create more pressure on their jobs. And as trade minister, I travelled the world, and those same concerns were repeated everywhere I went. A genuine fear or concern about what the future holds for a lot of people. And yet it needn't be that way. There's so many positive things that can come with advancements in technology. So, what I started to think about was, having had the unique benefit to spend 34 years in the John Lewis Partnership, what was it there that did create a sense of engagement and a sense of happiness? And there were 6 things which I'm going to rattle through very quickly. The first was reward and recognition. A lot of employers think the most important thing to make their workers happy is pay. It's not. As I'll explain later on, in the surveys I've conducted, pay is about the 8th or 9th thing that people rank as being important to their workplace happiness. If you get pay wrong, it can be a huge disincentive, but in and of itself, it is not a huge motivator. Far more important is recognition. If the lights were up, I'd ask you this question, but instead I'll give you the answer. How many times do you think a line manager thanks or congratulates an employee on doing something well? The answer is once every 4.5 months. Most people are thanked 3 times a year for the job that they're doing. And all the research says the more that can be done to recognise somebody's performance and thank them for it, or even give them constructive criticism, the better. The second thing is information. John Lewis, Stephen Lewis, felt that the sharing of information was the single most important thing in creating an engaged workforce. Without information, people simply can't make decisions, and yet increasingly management want to hold decisions and informations to themselves. And so anybody in the John Lewis Partnership can ask a senior manager what the profit figures are, what plans are for the future, and they'll be told. The third thing is empowerment, trusting people to make decisions. And I want to explain that by way of a very straightforward and simple story. I live in a small town in North Dorset called Sturminster Newton. And every Friday night I go to the local pub and have a drink. And there was a chap that I met there most Fridays, and he worked for a delivery company called CityLink. And about 3 years ago, 2 weeks before Christmas, CityLink went spectacularly bust. And it was on the main news because people had presents that were waiting there and they were hoping to get them for Christmas, but they were locked and shut inside a huge warehouse. So I saw this guy and asked him what he was going to do. And he said to me that all he'd been is a delivery driver all his life. And so what money he had, he was going to invest in a van, and he was going to set himself up as a local delivery driver. And I saw him about 3 months later. And I asked him how it was going, and he said, it's fantastic. So I said, are you happy? He said, I'm really happy. So I said, why? He said, when I worked for CityLink, they gave me a van. He said, I trashed it. He said, all I was worried about was driving around as quickly as I possibly could. He said, if I scratched it, it went into a body shop. He said, I washed it once a week. I took it down to the local car wash. I never checked the oil or the pressure. It wasn't my responsibility. But now I've bought a van with my money. I know that if I look after it and it lasts longer, I'll make more money. He said, when I worked for CityLink, they gave me 2 polo shirts. Those polo shirts had to last a whole year. He said they were disgusting after 3 months. He said, now I wear a shirt and a tie, and I make a point of looking really smart when I turn up on somebody's doorstep. He said, when I worked for CityLink, all I cared about was doing my deliveries as fast as I could. They gave me 60 deliveries. If somebody wasn't at the door in 10 seconds, I'd leave it on the doorstep, or if they didn't answer the door, I'd throw it over the garden wall. He said, it wasn't my concern. I just wanted to get the deliveries gone. He said, now, at 9 o'clock at night, if somebody phones me up and asks me to make a delivery, I'll pick up the phone and I'll do anything that I need to do to make that delivery the following day. And that's the difference between owning something and really caring about it and feeling as though you are working for somebody else. And the great power of the John Lewis Partnership was 100 years ago, the founder realised that making people feel as though they own something brings real commercial difference. The fourth thing is well-being. Mental well-being, physical well-being, financial well-being are all important to people's happiness at work. The fifth thing is a sense of pride. You'll all have heard the story about the cleaner at NASA when asked what his job was, says, I'm putting a man on the moon. Giving people a sense of pride in the job they're doing is hugely important. And lastly, job satisfaction. Job satisfaction really breaks down into two things. First of all, your career is being developed. People who are happy and engaged at work feel as though their line manager in their organisation really cares about their development and well-being. But lastly, and most importantly, it's about the relationship that somebody has with their line manager. The simple fact is that the vast majority of people leave a business, even a great business, because they don't get on with their line manager, or the relationship isn't as good as it could be. And all research shows that if you set out all measures like moving for promotion or for family reasons, 83% of people leave great companies because of that relationship with a line manager. So those six things together create a sense of whether people are happy and engaged or less so. So knowing that, and having travelled the world, and having seen the discontent, I decided that I wanted to do something about it. And so I created a digital platform called Engaging Works, and our mission is to make the world a little happier and a bit more decent. And the way that I've tried to do that is to put into the hands of employees the power to measure their own workplace happiness and then to do something about it. So often you find that it's organisations that control these kind of things. We had an annual staff survey at John Lewis and Waitrose. I'm sure you all have annual staff surveys. But it's there to serve the organisation. There's no comparative information against other organisations. And when you do the survey as an individual, you get no feedback. You might get data 2 months later that says, these are the things that we're going to work on, but it's not relevant to you. What I wanted to do was to make sure that there was something that any employee could go to, anywhere in the world. They could take a 5-minute survey, and at the end of it, against those 6 criteria and 15 straightforward questions, they would know whether they were happy or less happy than people that looked like them, their age, their gender, their ethnicity, people that were in the same industry as them, and also set against the global audience. And then having worked that out, I wanted to make sure that they had a CV they could go to, they could do a Myers-Briggs test for free to see what their personality type, they could go and look at job matching to see what jobs might better suit them. And that they then had a thoughtful plan for managing their own career. The truth is, in the world of the future, I don't think individuals should be relying on their line manager or their HR manager to dictate their future, to tell them what they need to do to get on. In the world of the future, I think individuals have to take responsibility for their own management and for their own development and for their own career. And that's why I wanted to give them the tools to do that, so that everybody had in their own possession the ability to be happy at work and to know how they did comparatively. As part of the app that you have for the conference, there's a link to Engaging Work, so you can find out how happy you all are. You can find out how happy you are compared to people at this conference, compared to people in your industry. And hopefully you will find it an interesting exercise. Or if you'd like any more information, you can contact me at mark.price@engagingworks. But I think that more of our future both for the benefit of society and for individuals and for companies, has to be a focus on making sure that individuals are happy at work, are engaged at work, and drive commercial success. Thank you very much. Okay, we're going to get the lights up. Somebody running? Okay, I can see the audience a bit now. I'm now going to invite 3 people on the stage, and I'm really hoping that none of them trip up on the top step. Has been so ably done before them. First of all, we've got Christine Gore. Christine, you're very welcome. Christine really needs no introduction, but of course, as part of Gow Capital Partners, has invested massively in real estate and property and a whole host of different things. So we're delighted to have you on the panel. Thank you very much indeed. We also have David Nelson, who's the head of design at Foster. And you'll all know Foster, the amazing architecture business who've done so many fabulous buildings. But David's talking to us as well about the workforce of the future and workplace of the future. And last, we have Johnny Lee, who has done many, many things, but I'm introducing him today as the founder of the Work Project. Ladies and gentlemen, will you welcome our panellists? You got a flicker, David?
Yeah.
Great. Thank you all very much for coming up on the stage. What I'm going to do is just ask each of the panellists to take 5 minutes to set out their vision of the workplace of the future, the happy workplace of the future. Then after that, I'll ask a few questions, and then I'll open things up to the audience. So we'll start with David, and then we'll do Johnny, and then we'll go to Christina. So, David.
Okay. Well, I mean, being architects, we get the opportunity to create the workplace. And we obviously do that in real time. We build now. So we have to be sure that we can bring all the latest thinking to bear on any projects that we do. And I think happiness and wellness and all those things are built from a number of different ingredients that form a space such as this. And one of which is a big element in discussion today in the workplace is really all to do with connectivity. And as many people here realize, that connectivity between people in a working environment, around about 150 people a day, can have a meaningful interaction. But what we're discovering and discovered on a number of projects now is that if you can see more of the organization that you work for every day, you may not connect with them, but it might engender an interest in knowing what they're doing. And if you're aware what other elements of your organization is at, and you can see them doing it, we believe that the organization will be better. So connectivity on a larger scale, and this project here is in Argentina, originally interestingly designed as a bank headquarters, but as life moves very quickly, the chairman who commissioned it moved on, and now there's a new person there who didn't want to move into the building. So it became a government office. The bank passed it over to government, and the government actually then, now occupy this space, which is, very open. It tries to bring together all of the kind of wellness thinking, the allothesia, the biophilia connection with landscape, all of the ways in which people can have a better environment to work, and trying to make it manifest in this project. So even at the very bottom, this is a 3-4-story high building. Right at the bottom down there in the workplace, there's natural light and connection with greenery. And also, as the world is predominantly filled with extroverts, we should always remember the introverts. And introverts actually do an awful lot of amazing work, but they actually prefer to be in a less open situation and more probably closed. So this building scales itself down in order to cope with that kind of method of working. This is Bloomberg's headquarters, which is a very different scale, right in the heart of London, just recently completed. It's a naturally ventilated building and scores very well in the kind of BREEAM ratings for what space will be. But it's interesting when you look at the workplace and how the workplace can be very very different. Contemporary ideas of workplace is really high on mobility, people moving around, connecting, laptops, cappuccino, sitting in sofas. It's that sort of image that the world presents of the new methods of working. And actually for a lot of people, it's not like that. It's still very intense. Life has to be hardwired for security reasons. These people here work incredibly hard. Their collaboration is that table in the middle of the space, and they get together every now and then for about sort of 2.5 minutes, and then they're back working in that place. Very interesting to think about millennials doing that kind of work. Would they do that, or is the nature of work going to change so dramatically that this kind of it will change the whole organisation in a company? And the building is very flexible to be able to respond to that. I quite like this one because the guy on the right, the bottom right, about in the 1970s, somebody decided that the way to develop this computer that was emerging would be to talk to it via a keyboard, which tend to put the entire global workforce back into the typing pool. So now we all do our own typing, we all do our own things which were taken away from us in the past. And then obviously we put a screen there and it completes the isolation. When you're at that screen, or when you're at your own screen or looking at your own phone, you're not connecting with anybody. You are electronically, but not physically in that dialogue. And we believe collaboration is critically important. I include this is in the same building. And I particularly like this photograph here, where there's a kind of, and as a chance, people interacting with one another around a space. There are about 4 or 5 computers, but they're actually also talking to each other as well, which we think is a very important thing. And then occasionally projects come along which allow us to explore how new ways of bringing people together. That there's a lot of discussion about what you do and about what other organisations do to get people to come together and interact and work in very, very new ways. And this is the Design District project that we're building in Dubai. It's now under construction. And the thesis behind this building was that new companies and young people in particular don't want to live in a baby boomer aesthetic. They actually want to create their own. So this space here is very simple concrete frame with industrial finishes and industrial surfaces that give more space for lower rent. So people can come here, and it's set to encourage the whole design and creative industries in Dubai. So filmmakers and people who are in the fashion industry, for example, as well as other types of creatives. And the idea, again, from that first project, where you might be working on a project in a small group of people, and you suddenly realise we need something to do with electronics. And, oh yeah, there's somebody over there. I remember talking to them. So you go to them and actually work it out. And then if you want the film made of the project, you go around the corner from here. So connectivity, visual, long-distance connectivity, as well as an immediacy, is something that we're exploring here. And the building literally is determined by others. It's very simple industrial. There's a lot of repetition. There's a lot of kind of the mechanical, electrical systems, for example, are actually all repeated. And we're trying to get economies in order to let the rental be lower by actually doing and designing from scratch a very sensible building, simple building. And this is the design school that forms part of one of the focuses within the overall plan. And again, we'll have its own amenities associated with that. But again, the same systems that we're actually developing. So.
Great. Thank you very much, David. Johnny, how do you think the world of the future is going to look?
Before I begin, I'd like to do a short survey, if that's okay, of the audience. I can kind of make out the hands if you raise hands. So how many of you guys think that we're going to be working in offices forever?
1.
1, 2.
I think.
So how many of you guys think that the office is one day going to disappear? More people. How many of you guys are not sure? Okay. Well, this is something that I think about all the time. I run a co-working space business. And one of the things that we did is aggregate a bunch of data to try to get large trends of what's happening in the world of work and with user behavior. And what our conclusion is, for the time being, the office is here to stay. However, I completely agree with what Mark said in his earlier presentation. The #1 trend that we discovered is that the future of office is about empowerment of the individual. It's about freedom of the individual in terms of architecture, design, services. And the data that we aggregated, we aggregated a bunch of data on user behavior across Asia Pacific. Specifically, we found 3 trends in the world of work. Number 1 is mobility. There is unprecedented mobility at the workplace for office workers, particularly in the knowledge work segment. It's unprecedented that knowledge workers are spending the least amount of time at their workstations. So according to our data, in 2016, 55% of office workers spent 55% of their time at their workstation, at their desk, during business hours. In 2016, that number dropped to 47%. And that number is gradually going down as people are becoming more mobile, and technology is the enabler. So people are becoming more mobile more than ever. The second trend that we found is collaboration, and particularly collaboration in small groups, frequent collaboration in small groups. So according to our data, 85% of all meetings that happened in Asia Pacific last year were in groups of 2, 3, and 4 people. That's a dramatic change from 10 years ago when, all the companies used to have large boardrooms, boss sits at the end of the table, broadcasts a message, everyone else takes notes. Right? Today, the main purpose of meetings has shifted from broadcasting to collaboration, and very frequent collaboration in groups of 2, 3, and 4 people. And the final trend that we discovered is agility. As technology, again, being the key catalyst to this, it's very difficult for companies to plan 10, 20 years ahead in terms of fitting out and designing their office space. So what companies are looking for now is more agility in terms of being able to find solutions that are suitable for that year, the next year, and so forth. So these are the 3 key trends that we discovered. And what's underlying these 3 key trends for me is the freedom of the individual. Mobility, the freedom to be mobile, to work anywhere. Collaboration, the freedom to collaborate anywhere, anytime. And the freedom to be agile without being tied to long lease terms. These 3 trends, the work project is created based on these 3 trends. It's something that we call activity-based co-working, ABCW. So that's what we see.
Right, thank you very much. Christina, for you.
So very interesting. As I'm listening to the expert talk about their specific businesses and field, I thought about my company, which is a private equity real estate company. So it's actually in finance. But of course, we buy buildings and then we asset manage it. And we obviously, part of it is to fill up with the right tenants. And so to us, the user, what they are looking for is actually very important. Obviously, we work with architects to design the space. So I think there are a couple of things that we focus in, which some of the keywords already kind of came out from the 2 gentlemen before me. So we look at 3 C words, really. It's connectivity, collaboration, and a forming of a community. So to us, we actually need to offer a creative solution for the future industries, so to speak. And so a lot of our buildings are focused on putting in TMT type tenants. And so flexibility is actually a key point, which is, I think, it's coinciding with Junie's project. And if I observe even our own company or staff in terms of their work habits, I do agree that it's a lot more flexible. They do not actually spend a lot of time in the office. So when they're actually in the office, it's actually collaboration time. Do we not need any rooms at all? I would not necessarily say so, but it should become like little pods where people could go in and have like a private telephone conversation. But it's not like an office type of room. And also a lot of companies that are growing, they are actually looking for flexibility of ability to grow and shrink. And also because their team may be traveling to another country when they're working on a certain project. So co-work space, actually, is a very good provider of that because they do not need to sign any long leases. And when they are in certain countries, they could go along with those kind of companies where they have expanded outside of one geographic region. And they can also decide when they want to lease more space and when they want to give back some. So again, that flexibility offering, it's very appealing to the millennials who are actually the ones building and growing companies these days. So those are the kind of requests that we would get. And it takes into consideration how we want to value add on our real estate projects as it goes. So I think that would be what I have to share.
Great, thank you very much. I've got 3 questions, and I'll tell you what they are in advance, so you can think about what your answers might be. The first thing I want to ask you about is productivity. In the old days, where everybody came into the office and everybody sat together, it was pretty easy to see who was working and who wasn't working. In the world of the future you're describing, how should companies think about productivity is the first. The second, from a design and work perspective, does the workplace need to be different for women and men? And I'll give you a statistic before I ask that second question. And the third is for the millennials you talk about and the different age groups. Do the different age groups need a different workplace going forward? So if we start with the productivity question, and if we go David, Christina, Johnny, how should companies think about productivity in the world of the future that you've described?
I think that productivity is really, in the end, related to results. And that might be breaking new ground in science or finance or anything through there. I think that work has become so complex that no one individual can really kind of go there and solve problems in any of those subjects. So the idea of collaborating and working together is very, very critical. But in the end, there's got to be a product. And if that can be done very quickly or it can be done, it takes longer. I think it's a question of analysing and understanding what the original intent was and what the actual final result turns out to be. If you walk around and look at people working or not working, people of my age would tend to think, what's going on here? And a lot of people come around our office and see people working in different ways and feel that it's not for them. Surely they can't be doing. And then they see the results, and then they see what we do and what gets produced. So I think we still have got to achieve things.
Well, for my kind of business, it's very easy because it's all about investments and also getting money in the door. So it's really very measurable that we don't need to see deal guys in the office, and I don't need to see salespeople in the office because they should be out there getting deals, talking to sellers or buyers, and for those that are capital markets, they should be out there talking to investors all the time. Finance people as well should be talking to the bankers all the time. So we don't really need them to see them in the office, especially with the technological advancement. I felt that I've worked for very big firms for 16 years in investment bank, and those were the days of still FaceTime is quite important. But of course, in the last 10 years, it really doesn't, because I felt that I'm actually work harder than ever before because 24/7 I'm reachable. I'm very reachable. Clients text me and all that, so I have to answer. Whereas before, if it's out of office hour, they don't necessarily call you, right? And so at the end of the day, is if it's a deal guy, how many deals have they done, right? And as like capital markets guy, have you brought in money? Right? It's very measurable, right? So response time from the finance team, who are obviously not on the front line, but they have to get financing for our deals. How quickly do they respond to our needs, right? So we don't need to see them. They just have to be very rapid in answering, our request. So.
Okay, Jenny, how do you feel?
Productivity is something that we think about a lot. We think about it all the time. I'd say we think about it in 2 different ways. Obviously, it's something that's very hard to measure. There's a lot of debate as to how do you measure productivity. But the way we think about it as a space provider is to make sure that we're delivering a space that can be high performance. That's the way we try to think about it. And high performance for us goes back to freedom of the individual. So if you need to put your head down and get private work done, you can have that freedom. If you need to collaborate, you can have that freedom. If you need agility, you can have that freedom. So having a high-performance environment that gives the individual the choice and empowers the individual to work in a way that maximizes his or her own productivity, that's how we think about high performance. And along with that, we've actually experimented with a lot of things. You know, I can't pretend that we've figured out all the answers, but we've experimented with a lot of things, including things like scent in the space. You know, it's proven that scents like rosemary and lemon improve concentration, so we experimented with that. We experimented with music and sound. It's proven that there's studies showing that certain beats per minute actually improve concentration rather than working in a dead silent room where the smallest noise can distract you. The challenge with this for us is to find universal answers, because what we realized in the workplace is if it's working for a group of people, but it's not working for certain groups of people, then that's a problem. So scent was a really good example. A lot of people liked it. Some people didn't like it, so we had to scrap it. So it's an ongoing experiment, but we try to think about it in terms of performance. And then the second way in which we try to think about productivity is, for us, the office should be a space that you really enjoy coming to. And you know, we can't prove that improves productivity. That type of happiness improves productivity, but we believe that that's very important. It's important for me anecdotally. So, you know, we're actually the co-working space in Asia that's won the most amount of design awards in this region. It's something that we pay a lot of attention to, making sure that our spaces are beautiful, as well as high performance. So that's the way we think about productivity.
Actually, having a bar is very important in the office. And the area that we get the most collaboration and connectivity is our bar.
Well, it's funny. I was going to ask you that because on the Engaging Work survey, one of the things that you do when you finish is you're asked, what 3 things would you do to improve your happiness at work? Pay, as I said earlier, is the 9th highest. The number 1 is flexibility. I'd like my employees to give me more flexibility about the hours I work, and you've touched that. But number 2, 16% of people said we'd like more social events at work. And from that, you might surmise that as people are doing less at home because they have less time, they look for more in the workplace. And yet what you've described is a workplace where there might be less connectivity. So your answer is bars in the workplace. Do you have any other answers about bringing people together in a social way in the workplace?
Gosh, bars. Bars are good.
No, it's just a bar. It's just a bar. It's not like a, you know, like a big room or whatever. It's a bar. It's actually a bar. So people just stand around, but it's a proper bar that there's always wine supplies and snacks and they do like to go there. And there's a specific time, like every Thursday and Friday, around 5:30. That's when people started going there. And then when I hear noise, then I go out and join them up. It's quite powerful, actually. I was very busy, and then I'm like, okay, they started drinking. Maybe I should go and mingle a bit. And that drawn me off, and then that would be like an hour and a half of chit-chatting with the staff.
5:30 in the morning is early to start. Okay, the second thing I was going to ask you about was gender. Again, what my research says is that overall women are less happy at work than men. Although out of 20 sectors, there are 8 where women are happier. Women under the age of 25 are happier in work than men. So when you think about design in the workplace, do you think about it differently for men and women?
Do you want to?
You go first. I'll follow you.
Okay. Frankly, I mean, I think, frankly speaking, for us, we try to look for solutions that are universal, you know, to sort of, you know, we think ideas like mobility, collaboration, and agility are universal trends that people are looking for at the workplace today. Gender is not something that we've studied as a subject matter alone, But what I can say is that, certain amenities at the workplace are becoming essential. They're becoming absolutely necessary, and those are the ones we have. For example, nursing room for ladies, and what else can I think of? That's the only one I can think of right now.
So I'll rescue you. Okay? Well, because it's called workspace, so I figure that is much more flexible. So I think, as a woman, as mentioned earlier, I did spend 16 years in investment banks, which are very traditional banking environment. Global banks, though, they try to cater to all these female diversity needs and all of that. And I was very involved in the forefront because I actually have 4 children in the midst of that 16 years of my career. So there really was nothing, nursing room, none of that. Okay, so I have to do whatever I need to do in the bathroom, which is kind of pretty bad. And now, of course, progressively things change, and so nursing room would be like a standard amenity. Okay, so but I think, to be fair, because we're talking about a flexible office, flexibility, people's freedom of movement, which actually means that for women it's already a lot easier, because again, as I mentioned, FaceTime is not really what employers are looking for, or modern employers are looking for. So they technically, you don't really need anything specifically special for female, except for the nursing room or privacy. Because if you do need to be away for children's sake or whatever, that you could go off as long as you're reachable, right? So at least that's how we think of that aspect as an employer. So we don't really have any issue because of the flexibility of work or lifestyle. Yeah.
I think if you follow what you were saying about trying to recognize that people are individuals, whether they're male or female, everybody has their own set of needs and requirements for things. And if we really pursued what was right for individuals, I think we'd end in a situation that would be happier for everybody. I think whether there's a difference or not between the two, I think we're going to be forced into a situation by recent events that where it has to be the same. It has to be neutral for everybody. Certainly the women in our office don't want to be biased, in their direction. They want to be recognised for their talent and their ability and advance accordingly. So I think we will go through an era of that. The gender-neutral toilets are already coming from California, so they're creeping into our work over there. So I'm sure that's going to be a topic that actually evolves very quickly. Things always start in California.
Okay, and earlier on, Christina, I think you mentioned the millennials. As a group, they're not very happy in the workplace. They're the least happy group, under 25s. And interestingly, those in non-management are happier than those in management, which I think is quite remarkable. And the least happy are those that work in tech. So if you want to have one of the unhappiest groups in the world today in work, they're men under the age of 25 working in management in tech. So do you think differently about the world that you're creating for this new generation coming into work from the generations that have gone before?
Yeah, I think for a number of years now, we've been very aware of a whole range of generations. One of the young guys in the office came up to me and said, "David, you do realise a generation is now only 6 years?" And so therefore we've got a whole, as most organisations have, a whole layering of generations. And I think in our world of design and building, you tend to find that people in an older generation have had a lot of experience. They've actually built buildings and they know our profession very, very well. But they probably grew up training not using computers. Certainly sustainability as a subject was never ever taught. And if you go to the young people coming in, they're much more aware of the world, not only those subjects. They've never built anything, but actually they're aware of issues, things that we need to build into projects. And that you then have to strike a balance between those two different ways of looking at the world. And I think it's a grossly unrecognised situation. And I'm not going to profess to have any answers to it. I think my own daughter, who's obviously a lot younger than me, I don't know, I think she's just above being a millennial, but she's always complaining about millennials because they're just not motivated in the same way. So I think exactly how that manifests itself in the workplace, though, is an interesting thing to ponder on.
Christina?
So I'm 35, so I'm sort of depending on how you define a millennial. So I could be defined as a millennial or older than millennial, but I suppose what I can do is speak on behalf of the millennials. And I think for me and my peers, the way we think about it is that ultimately the workplace is the environment that we spend the majority of our waking lives in. A significant portion of our adult life is spent in the office. So I think for me, it starts with that and making sure that that space delivers happiness, right? And so then, you know, the types of things that I spoke about, I think become important. Bar becomes important, you know, social environment becomes important. Your relationship with your line manager becomes important. And I'm not sure if this generation has a higher expectation. I'm not sure what the reason is. But I think that's the starting point. But, you know, perhaps that's nothing new, right? Yeah, I think that's yeah.
I think it's about the job that they choose. Is that something that they really love to do? So I think as an employer, you know, we always, or senior management, so to speak, you kind of really have to ensure that each and every single one of your employee exactly loves what they do. I think that at least for our company at Gore is really part of the DNA, is that we have a lot of different roles, different departments, and part of the senior management is to mentor the people, to put them in the right job. Because workplace is actually secondary. It's actually what role they are playing in that particular business, which I don't think it changed at all. I agree. That is that number one thing. And then it comes as in like, whether you like the colleagues you're working with, and every day you go into the office that makes you happy, but it's the job itself, right? So I think if you're talking about the management 25 below and doing tech not happy, they're probably not right for that job, you know? They may be getting people complaining all the time because something is not working, because I do that. I complain whenever some technical thing is not working. So maybe certain people are just like you're not right for that kind of job, you know? So anyway.
Okay. Which may well be the case. So just one last thought. In the world of the future, we're told that we'll have mass customization, that everything from Uber to how we book holidays will provide an experience unique for us and only us. There's an old saying that if you've got your head in the fridge and your feet in the oven, then you'll be an average temperature. And what's clear is that we have many, many different generations now across our workforces. The needs of the millennials, as you said, and Generation Z look as though they're different to the older generations. There's differences in terms of ethnicity. There's differences in terms of gender. And so the world that you've described seems to be quite consistent. Do you think it will be consistent, or can you imagine changing the world of work in the future from a design building perspective to be unique to individuals' needs, rather than say, here it is, take it or leave it? What do you think?
I think the beauty of the future is that everybody gets it wrong, and nobody really knows. And I think that in the end, from our point of view, in the physical world that we have to build, I think there'll be ever-increasing demand for flexibility, for providing space that can be customized. I mean, if we start a building, you know, a typical one might take 3 or 4 years to build. 3 or 4 years is a hell of a long time. And there's bound to be new technologies just as you finish, you know, the project, and therefore it's instantly obsolete. So I think the pressure to really think that through will be great in our world.
Actually, it's a very interesting question that you bring up that led me to think of a very creative project that our company did in Los Angeles, because it is actually a market where there is a lot of creativity of many different industries. And sometimes is you bring certain tenants or certain companies something that they haven't had before, and they don't know they can have it. But with these creative industry, they all want to have their own identity. And LA was actually a very, very good ground for that experiment, which turns out to be hugely successful. So basically, it's just warehouse. It is literally just tin box kind of warehouses, which you could do anything with it. And it definitely doesn't take, as you just mentioned, 3 to 4 years to build it. Yeah. It's basically, the exterior is just a tin box. Inside is 10,000 square feet. You could do whatever you want with this because it's completely empty. Okay, and you could take everything down as well very quickly. So, we actually did buy a number of these tin boxes in the fringe of Chinatown in Los Angeles, and where it used to be fishmonger, was occupying them. And then, so we gradually amassed those kind of land, you call it, and then we decided that, well, we're going to make this place a people gathering place, a new spot where the millennials would like to hang out. So you have to have a theme. So we basically decided that music would be the kind of the theme that young people is drawing on these days. So ended up, we started out with really looking for the right kind of tenant and pitch it to them. So the first tenant came in before any other groups came in was a music agency, which is Paradigm. And so they took the first warehouse and they retrofitted the interior exactly to their liking, which only takes, I think, 9 months, because it was just open office and then just creative, but whatever space they want, which is open, high ceiling, everything. And then gradually, of course, there's a lot of band that would come and play for them and all that. So you created music. And then suddenly there were high-end luxury brands that wanted to host events there, because again, you could rent another warehouse, which is empty, and you could do whatever thing with it inside. And then the Paradigm would put up music, with new bands, and everybody liked new things. So suddenly the sort of reputation started to grow that, it's a very cool place, and then we started to get like restaurants in. So there was a very famous restaurant by David Chang, Momofuku in New York, would just open one, took up another warehouse of ours, leased it, and then opened called Major Domo, which is extremely successful. So forth and so on, and there's another New York bar that came and operates. So now it is actually a people gathering spot, and we actually created it out of tin boxes of warehouse, right? So these would be, is it the future? Is it going to apply to every single market? We don't know. But certainly, there are things to be learned that this is very successful in LA. So is there any other spot in China somewhere, which we do a lot of Chinese project, somewhere that it could make it work as well, right? So these are, from our perspective, what we think about, even though we're in investment, we think about as a creative solution for more future, as in the evolution of human needs, And all it gets back to is connectivity, collaboration, and create a community. It goes back to all of those three things.
Thank you. Last word with you.
I completely agree with what David and Christina said. Flexibility in terms of design and construction, not only with buildings, but actually with interior spaces as well. That's the way we think about space. When we look at a meeting room, we build a meeting room, but we don't take it for granted that it's going to be a meeting room for 10, 20 years. It could be repurposed. So building the infrastructure to make sure that various spaces can be repurposed in the future. And one thing that I can say with certainty is that with buildings, what corporate occupiers and company occupiers are looking for is sort of a menu of options. So it's no longer about, we want to take this floor and fit it out and use this space for the next 10 years. They're looking for a range of options, ranging from, we want 1 floor of this, X amount of hours of meeting rooms, X amount of hours of town hall space. We want the flexibility to sign up for this amount of desks on a monthly rolling basis. So the buildings themselves will have to be designed to cater for that type of demand, which the tenants are asking for nowadays. Yeah.
Right. Thank you. We're out of time, ladies and gentlemen, but could I ask you all, please, to thank David, Christina, and Johnny. Thank you. If you'd like to find out how happy you are at work, if you go to engaging.works and take the happiness survey, it's free and it'll take you 5 minutes. And I hope that having taken it, you'll find that you're all extraordinarily happy. Thank you very much indeed.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, could you please exit the room in order for us to prepare for the next session? Thank you.
discussion, and I think we've started on a fairly optimistic note. Hopefully we can find something a bit more positive to say, but let me introduce the panel who will be discussing the subject, the dawn of the age of AI. And I have, first of all, on my left, Raymond Chow, who is Chairman, CEO of PwC in Asia Pacific and Greater China. Steve Leonard, founding CEO of SG Innovate from Singapore. And then Martin Haynes, Managing Director for Asia for First Derivatives, which is a Northern Irish company. Martin.
Thank you.
And last but not least, David Hallowell, Director of Knowledge and Innovation Delivery at Pinsent Masons, which is a lawyer, you reminded me to say, David. So hopefully the sound is working fine and everybody can hear. My echo seems to have gone, so thanks for that, guys. What I thought would be maybe a way to start this is by just talking about how we see this in my organisation, which is Tech UK. We are the industry representative body for private sector digital tech companies in the UK. We have 950 member companies, and they go from chips to clicks, so everything from Intel and ARM up to Google and Facebook and pretty much everything and beyond, including an awful lot of companies who are either developing or deploying AI in all its forms. And when we look at that, we see a huge amount of potential and opportunity. Your own firm's research, Raymond, says that there's going to be about nearly $16 trillion of potential GDP gain from AI by 2030. The UK, we think it's going to be, the sector's going to be £630 billion to the UK economy by the same sort of time period. And it's going to apply across a lot of sectors, maybe every sector, but particularly transport, financial services, healthcare, public sector, retail are the sort of standout ones. And the opportunities, as you heard from some of the younger and older people in the video, for all sorts of things, from healthcare, where it's already being used in diagnostic as well as helping clinicians, through to public service delivery, and of course the whole raft of financial services opportunities. But, and I think we're going to get to some of the buts in the discussion, there are some challenges here. The first one is, strangely enough, talking about something that potentially is going to remove everybody's jobs. There aren't enough people skilled in AI. I think we're going to hear a bit more about that. And what's the opportunity, but what's the challenge for us to do that. The second thing is exactly that point about, okay, so when we do get AI delivered, what is the impact on jobs and society? Pick a number, 30% to 50% of all jobs could be, or every job, according to one of the people on the video, could be removed or substantially changed by AI. And then last question I'd like to just put on the table are those around trust and confidence in AI. Again, I almost don't need to set this up because you've all been looking at the news, the Uber car and also Cambridge Analytica issues in the UK. There's a whole bunch of questions around the use of AI, whether using people's data in this way, how we build trust and confidence. Because if we don't have that, then we will not be able to realise the advantages that should come from this technology. So, without further ado, I'd like to just open up now and ask the panellists. And what we want to do is try and make this as interactive as possible, even though we can't see you in the dark, but we think you're there. Yes, you are there. I heard somebody then. And so what we plan is maybe just to pick a few questions among ourselves and then see what follow-ons there are from the audience as we go through in the next 40 minutes. So, Raymond, if I could start with you. I know PwC have done an awful lot of research in this. I've read some of the material myself. And I wonder what your perspective is maybe on the first two issues, the one about skills. Sure. You know, what sort of skills do we have? I mean, you see salaries now in AI. Somebody's calculated that DeepMind in the UK, the average salary there's got to be more than $300,000 a year. And then lastly, also that any thoughts you might have about that ethical question?
Sure. Thanks, Julian. Great to be here. And great, this is a very interesting topic, and obviously one that's very important. And first of all, I'd like to say that when people look at AI, you got to understand that AI has been with us. It's just not about tomorrow. It actually has been with us. If you think about it, there are different ways to describe AI. And I'll just talk, for example, assisted intelligence. We've had that for a number of years. GPS, we're all using it every day now. The question is, what is next? So it gets into augmented intelligence, which are things you can't do today. It's about using programs or a combination of programs that allow us or enable us to do something, to achieve something. A good example would be the ride-sharing services that you just can't do on your own is using that AI that would allow us to do that. And then the next stage, which is even more challenging, but we are moving there, is about the automated or autonomous intelligence, which is when the machines are starting to act on their own and make decisions. And that's when you get into a lot of the issues. So today we don't complain. We don't have a problem with assisted intelligence. We want them. They're good. They're helping us. They're making us a lot more efficient. But no doubt we're going to get into a lot of some of these other issues that you've just talked about. Talk about an organization. Talk about people. Talk about jobs. According to a study, actually, two things I want to share. If you look at, we just did a recent CEO survey globally. If you ask the global CEOs, and we covered like 2,000 of them. And so finding the right skills in the AI age is one of the top 5 concerns. Mm-hmm. Now, what's more interesting, though, if you come back to this part of the market, if you ask the Chinese CEOs, and based on our survey, that's top. That's their #1 concern. What does that mean? I don't know. But it's saying that in this part of the world, the Chinese CEO is a lot more focused. And therefore, they're a lot more focused in terms of investing in technology, investing in AI. In fact, with the NPC in Beijing, where the president has made it very clear, this is top on the agenda, top in the Chinese plan. So this is all very important. So just to go back to your question in terms of how do we deal with the issue of people for organizations, you got to look at this as a big transformation project. How do you bring your people with you? How do you prioritize? How do you make sure that the organization embrace this new technology, this AI, and it's all about people working with machines at the end of the day to generate or to derive those benefits that we're talking about. It's going to be a lot more efficient. It's going to create a lot more productivity. And it's interesting, though, out in the market today, you hear a lot of studies, reports that talks about the loss of jobs. But I challenge that, no doubt. I mean, a study was, I saw there was another study that says you're going to lose 800 million jobs between now and 2030. That's probably correct. The question is how many new jobs you're going to create with AI. You look at the statistics today, and we've had AI for a number of years now, depending on which type of AIs you're talking about, and that's going to continue to move forward. How many jobs are created today? You look at the employment rate in the UK, it's the highest ever. Well, I don't know if it's ever, but it's very high. Pretty high. Yeah. And across the world today, employment rate is actually very high, generally. So I actually think what AI is doing for everybody is creating new values. It's all about us. How do we embrace that? How do we make sure that our organizations, our people understand what it does and is ready and is prepared to use that AI and work with that AI as we deliver and create more value for the society. So in terms of, just very quickly on the ethical issues, I mean, this is some of the challenges that we need to deal with. How do you deal with data privacy? Clearly, AI technology is moving a lot quicker than what governments and regulators can do. And by the time you put up a policy, you're 5 years behind the technology. So what do you do? So you're already seeing self-regulatory organizations, and it's about people working together, countries working together, organizations working together. What are some of the basic principles as we continue to develop AI and use AI that we should agree upon? So make sure that things like, what are some of the values that should be embedded in developing that AI, in putting together the algorithms for the AI. What are some of the basic standards that we should have? What are some of the monitoring procedures that we should have? What are some of the audit procedures that we should make it available? So to build that trust, ultimately, ethical issues about trust, right? At the end of the day. So these are some of the things that we need to work on, is working on it together.
Okay.
I think it's not about a particular country, it's not about a particular organization, it's all about working together.
So, thanks, Ray. Steve, you work with startups, particularly in Singapore, but around the world as well. Mm-hmm. A couple of things that Raymond said there, I'd be interested to get your perspective on that. The first one is the new jobs. Are they actually, is this what's happening? People are going into startups, there are going to be lots and lots of small businesses, and they're going to create the new jobs, and they'll be in smaller organizations. Is that the story? And then maybe en route to that, then how does a startup compete with the kind of money that's being paid by the larger companies? How do they do that? I mean, I think you've got, 30 companies so far going in Singapore. So, what do you think?
So briefly, SG Innovate is a company that we formed about 1.5 years ago. Our sole shareholder is Singapore government. So we've set this up as a private limited funded by Singapore government so that we can live in two universes, both the private and the public. Our goal is to help scientists, researchers turn their work into the foundation of a deep tech product that forms the base of a company. So in a nutshell, that's what we try and do. AI is clearly one of the most important areas that we're working with. We've got people that are working with computer vision to try and improve early stage diagnosis of different medical conditions. So that's not a terribly new thing in the sense that there's lots of computer vision. In fact, just as a quick anecdote, about 1 year ago, I was at a computer vision pattern recognition event. Doesn't sound very exciting, but there's 4,000 people in attendance. And when I went on a Sunday morning at 9 o'clock thinking I could pick my seat, it was full, already full. Most of the folks there were from Asia, even though the event was being held in North America. So for me, the message is clear, which is a huge amount of the invention, a huge amount of the discovery, experimentation is occurring from within Asia, which is why we think it's such an exciting time for us. We're trying to think about how to improve recognition of certain images. Ultrasound, because it's more difficult than a CT or an MRI. So there are some tough problems. Our goal is not to be a job creator. Candidly, startups are not great job creators until they become big companies. But what they do is they solve problems that may be different or more difficult for a major corporation. And having spent a lot of years in a corporation, companies are good at executing to a plan. They're less good at experimenting and taking on some risk, primarily because they have quarterly results and other things that they need to worry about. So we don't think about it from a job creation per se. What we think about it is how can startups help solve some really tough problems that are important to the larger society. But example, radiology. Sometimes people say computer vision will replace radiologists. We don't think so. We think there's not enough radiologists. They're certainly not evenly distributed. Yeah. So if you go to parts of ASEAN, there's very few. Singapore, we're blessed. Hong Kong, I'm sure, is blessed. But if you go to Cambodia, Laos, Vietnam, Myanmar, it's a different story. So we're trying to think about how can we use tools like these to help jobs, help physicians and caregivers, as opposed to being a big job creator. But we definitely think that a lot of the cool next phase of what's going to be happening is originating out of the startups.
Okay, so it's augmentation rather than augmented rather than artificial.
It's inevitable that there will be some displacement. I think to Raymond's point, it's not going to be this is purely about everything that goes on today and helping a little bit. There will be some disintermediation or some replacement, but it's not this mass exodus of people that are wiped out in terms of roles. But there's always been this. If you look at pictures of people that were assembling something, used to be a lot of human beings standing around with hammers. Then there was automation with some of the robotics that has been around since the 70s and 80s. Now you go to that same factory and there's nobody in the picture because there's much more of the robotics having their own programming. So there will always be a shift. But our goal is to try and think about this from an aging society, chronic care conditions, densely populated cities and transportation, public safety, energy conservation. Those are macro issues, and we think AI has an important role to play in that.
Okay, so solving problems will bring opportunity with it. Can I come to you, Martin? Because it's all about the data, isn't it? And that's what you do, I think, at First Derivatives. And maybe you could just explore both, what you do and the excellence of using that, but maybe just touch on the, well, whose data is it anyway question as well.
So, great to be here. First Derivatives, we are a consulting and big data company. And through our technology division, KX Systems, we have a piece of technology called KDB, which is the world's leading time series database. And why that's important in the context of AI, two key facets with AI or machine learning. One is there is a huge volume, extreme volumes of data that are needed. So the more data you have, the theory goes, the better your algorithm becomes, the better the training becomes, and with obviously improvements in mathematical techniques and theories, neural networks, your algorithms should improve. So first thing, you need large data sets. The second aspect then, typically, a lot of these decisions are going to be made in real time, and second by second, event by event. So where our technology is able to play a part in that is, we're able to process huge volumes of data. Our heritage is 25 years working in the financial markets, where you can take real-time events, put it in the context of a historical event and trend and pattern, and then traditionally you would have actioned that. So in the AI world, you're taking effectively what was the output, the action, the signal, building that with the data, and then looking at the predicted modeling of where that will take you. So the issue around that is then your compute capability, and effectively how can you scale that platform? And that's fortunately with the technology we have, one of the benefits and advantages that we're able to bring, and very fortunate. I think that the challenges, and so in terms of the data, who owns the data? Well, fundamentally, it depends on the application, it depends on the use case, and it depends on which sector you're looking at. The sectors that we've traditionally concentrated on is less on the retail side and more on the financial services, manufacturing, telco, utilities. I'll touch on NASA and what we're doing with space prevention of the trillion-dollar issue, which is called the solar storm, and also an F1. But in the space that we operate, which is traditionally more of a professional nature, the data is typically owned by the institutions themselves. So NASA owns that data. They have satellites in the sky, they own that data. They also have Earth assets, which basically is also looking and listening at what is happening with the sun. They own that data. Then they have 20 years worth of Earth data that they supplement that with. So they have a number of satellites in space that's producing terabytes of data over 20 years. You then look at basically what is happening, and the issue with the trillion-dollar storm is what's called a coronal mass ejection, a CME, which is where particles or gaseous mass will break off them in the sun. And what we're looking to identify through AI and predictive analytics is hopefully not the scenario of that one outlier that is going to hit Earth, but hopefully comes close to Earth. Because if it hits Earth, then the impact is loss of communication, loss of navigation, loss of the internet, loss of everything electronic, because that will mess up our whole electromagnetic and atmospheric pressures and systems. And so what you're using there is effectively data owned by NASA in that scenario. You're processing huge volumes of data per second. And we're predicting and looking at, working with Lockheed Martin, what is the probability, what is the predictive nature of that event happening and impacting us? Clearly, they own that. In financial markets, they own that. Across telco, utilities, it becomes more interesting. And in the previous AI talk, and we were just discussing this morning, when you go on the web and you click as an individual, you're not necessarily giving anyone the authority or permission to use that data. And the ethical issues around data usage itself, and if I give it to Steve and then Steve gives my data to someone else, how is that controlled? How is that monitored? How is it measured? And that clearly is a major issue. So from our side, it really is around, you need huge volumes of data. You need to process that data very quickly. And then you need to build those algorithms and train the algorithms. And because more big data has been available, those algorithms will start becoming more effective and more efficient as time goes by.
It sounds like a good note on which to move to David, looking at this from a legal point of view. But maybe you could start on what you're doing in Pinsent Mason, because I think you're trying to get ahead of the curve, which everybody's predicting that professional jobs, white-collar jobs, lawyers, accountants, etc., are as liable to be affected by automation and AI as any sort of job. I just wonder what's the view from the firm, and what are you trying to do about that, David?
Yeah, so there will be impacts and there will be effects. So Pinsent Masons is an international law firm of about 3,000 people, headquartered in the UK, and we've been present in Hong Kong for 35 years. The last person to speak on that video was Vincent Connor, actually. He's head of our Hong Kong office. And don't worry, Vincent, I haven't got a robot going into your desk, so when you get back, you will still have a desk there and something to go back to. But we've always been an innovative firm, and we try to invest in some of these areas, as you said, ahead of the curve. So we started looking at AI in law 7 years ago. Legal tech wasn't a thing then. AI for law wasn't a thing then. So we had to build ourselves. So we had to build our own capability. And so we recruited a guy who came out of a Scottish university, in fact, which has had, for the time, an extraordinary course, which was combined law and computer science. And there aren't many of those around. And so he came and started to build some of our own systems around expert systems for automating process, data analytics for turning large volumes of text into data, which we can provide to our clients, and now looking at some sort of predictive tools for predicting case outcomes. But I want to come back to a point that we've picked up already that Raymond was talking about, which is where are the skills going to come from? I was talking to this guy's computer science professor, and he says the computer science and law program was fantastic because it brought women into computer science. The core computer science program was always just men. But as soon as it was combined with law, you were getting women coming to the program. And diversity in everything we do has got to be a fantastic thing. But if we're excluding sort of 50% of the population for going to computer science because of these biases, that's not a good thing. But the other thing he said was that they ditched the program. They had stopped doing computer science at law at just the time when it was starting to take off. So I was taking part in a consultation with the British government about where they should be placing their bets in terms of STEM training and engineering. And the focus there was trying to get people who are coming through university, coming out of STEM, to either go to a startup where they could have a bit less salary, but they're going to sell it and make their millions, or they're going to go off for Google and DeepMind and earn 300 grand. But actually, in the UK, our biggest export, one of the biggest exports is professional services. So how can we as professional services, PwC must have the same challenge, get these really bright STEM graduates not only to come into our professions, but ideally to have some experience of the things that we're doing as well, so they can bring both the professional experience and also their technical skills to bear on our businesses. So
there's some big questions there, aren't there? The entry-level jobs presumably are the ones that will automate first. And that's been the way in which most firms have done their recruiting. The pyramid always starts that way. But what we're actually looking for now is to bring people in at maybe quite junior ages in jobs which are as significant as perhaps a partner. So now we're at the point where 1 in every 50 of our client-facing professionals is either a computer scientist, a software engineer, or a process engineer. And those are the people who are coming in at the bottom of that pyramid, and they're working with our clients and they're working with our lawyers. Okay. Now, you touched on something that before. I'm going to ask in a minute if there are questions for what's been said so far from the audience, or any points audience members want. There are microphones. I don't know if we can get the lights up so people can see who's got their hand up when and as they do. But before I do that, I've got to pick up on your point about gender bias. Looking at this panel,
we're not doing a good job.
Do we represent the problem? And I mean, Raymond, I know PwC have looked at this, and I'd be interested in your perspective, Steve, because startups are notorious in some parts of the world for not being very good at gender balance, and certainly not at minority group balance. But AI has a habit of amplifying things. If things are already bad, there's an example from Washington University that I saw where if you just did some analysis of a public database of photos of people cooking, you get 33% more likely to show women. If you do that through an AI algorithm, it's nearly 70% more likely to show women. So the bias is obviously there in the base material, but the AI was amplifying it. Now, what's the problem, and what can we do about it, Raymond?
Well, this goes right into, Julian, this whole ethical issues, and actually it goes into the training and education as well. If you think about the problem you just identified, it is about how we build the right algorithms in the AI. And it goes into part of the concerns amounts to society is this whole trust issue. Is it making the right decision? Is it giving you the right decisions or information at the end of the day? Is it not biased? This whole thing about garbage in, garbage out. If you throw in a bunch of data that is biased, that's incorrect, that's not structured, then it gives you a bunch of useless information at the end of the day. So this whole transparency of AI is a main topic today. Where's the balance between protecting IP versus the transparency, because the transparency will create better trust. But then you talk about transparency, who cares? Because you wouldn't understand it anyway. It's too technical. So then the question is whether you should have some standards, monitoring, which is what we do very well today, is part of our purpose, PwC, is build trust in society. We have a role here. Should there be some standards around monitoring and ensuring that the AI is delivering or executing or delivering what it's supposed to do, what's intended? Is there any ways to look into the algorithms to make sure that the values that were employed or used in building the algorithm is consistent with societal expectations? So those are the things. And if you tie it back into education and training, that's very important too. What is critical in terms of educating our younger children today? It's a lot about the soft skills. It's not about the technical knowledge. It's about the soft skills. So this whole thing about values, about working together, about creativity, that's where the emphasis should be.
Right.
And hopefully driving to the good benefits that we are looking for in terms of AI working with human and making the right decisions. Today is still us making the decisions. It's just providing the insights and helping us to do that. So I think that's what's important. Focusing on the soft skills, looking at how do we, striking the right balance between transparency of AI versus this whole black box issue, AI black box. We all sit here and says, we're not techies, we're not data scientists. So I don't know what's in there.
Yeah.
Right? So why should I trust it? Is it making the right decision, to your point?
I think, though, you've got to break down. I'd break down two elements. You've got the people bias, essentially, and then you've also got the veracity of the data, the trustworthiness of the data, right? So you've got to get a complete data set, and the more data you have, the deeper, the more granular that data goes, the better. So that's your feature engineering in terms of the AI process. So, before you start anything, you've got to think about your data.
Yeah.
So where's that coming from? Then you go into, because then you're going to use that data into your modeling to train your algos. And that modeling is going to happen from a human interaction. And humans then are dictating what they're looking to try and find. So, a key question is, in the use of AI, what is it you're trying to achieve that will benefit what you have today in established business processes?
Right. Some of the data is so important. So there's been some interesting work done on parole board decisions in law. And so a recent example where people were examining parole board decisions in the UK and who was going to be let free on parole. And unfortunately, they were showing some strong racial bias. And I think part of the challenge here is that when a parole board is taking a decision, they're looking at a whole range of things, some of them objective factors like racial profiling, but other things as well which necessarily the AI can't take into account. But then there was some work done longer ago which was looking at parole board decisions through a whole day, a sequence before the same set of judges. And there was a marked change in your likelihood to get parole through the day. So they looked at it, and as you were just after a break, if you came before them, you were likely to get parole. And as it went towards the break, you were less likely to get it. And they analysed it and said, well, that's because the parole board judges were getting hungry and they were getting grumpy. And if they were grumpy, you were less likely to get parole. So are we expecting perfection from AI, where actually something which is better than the human intervention is what we should really be aiming for?
I think that's a very good point. But I'd like to just come to Steve, though, because if you take all those factors, Steve, then it's who's writing the algorithm or who's developing this that's important. Because if you don't have any women there, if you don't have any people from different groups in society, different ages, then you're in trouble, aren't you? And I mean, as you look at it from the startup community, is that a problem, or is that something that's going to get fixed?
I mean, I think it's always a problem, but I do want to echo the point, which is I think it's unfair for us to assume that people are any great decision makers, right? So if I bridge briefly into, not to diminish the role of bias in writing algorithms, but this idea that we'd say, gee, we need to wait until there's never a problem with an autonomous vehicle until we put one on the road. And the answer is we accept humans bumping into each other and bad things happening every single day, but we expect much more from an autonomous vehicle. So I do think that we have an unrealistic expectation. I want to come back to the point that you mentioned about women. We have the two examples that I shared about image recognition trying to improve radiologist outcomes are both founded by female scientists that we're working with. So it's not anything where we've said, gee, we've hit a magical ratio of 50-50 or anything else. But what I would say is we have no shortage of amazing female scientists in Singapore. What we need to be better at is helping them feel ready in whatever way we want to define that, making the jump from academia and research into founder and entrepreneur. But we have some really amazing people that are building really amazing companies, and we're excited that a good percentage of those are female scientists. This idea of bias and so on, I'm a believer of it will work itself through. As long as we're sensitive, I think the gap is if we're not paying attention and we're not aware of outcomes. But back to the example of before lunch, after lunch, people make mistakes all the time. It's when we're aware and we take some action, then we can improve. And so, yeah, there's going to be unintended or intended bias in some of these things, and we just have to confront it and work it through.
Okay. So look, what I'd like to do now is see if there, if I can avoid doing that, see if there are questions that have been provoked by what the panels have been saying already. Do we have any questions in the room? I see a hand up. No.
Hope so. I mean, how can we have a whole room full of people?
I know. Don't disagree with anything we've said. Well, while they're thinking, there's a question right down the front here, please.
So I'm slightly biased, but one of the reasons that Northern Ireland has such good, strong software engineers, Northern Ireland, because I work for Invest Northern Ireland, is because of the close collaboration between industry and the universities. Yep. So companies like First Derivatives, they actually feed back to the universities, Ulster, Queen's in Northern Ireland about how the programs, how the university syllabus should be tweaked to make sure that they're relevant, because AI, computer science, all of this, it's all moving so quickly. So I think that that is a really good way to go. And also we mentioned women. So there's a lot of spin-ins, spin-outs with the two universities as well in Northern Ireland to do that, to leverage on the academics and to make sure that that gets commercialised. So I guess for the panel, what do you think about that? Do you think that governments should be encouraging more of this in your relevant governments? What are your thoughts?
Okay, so was there another question? We maybe take the two together. I think there's one here.
Thank you. Just a quick question on the nature of jobs versus work. We've discussed a lot through the panel about jobs and loss of jobs and creation of new jobs. But what's the panel's comments on work versus jobs as we move forward? Thank you.
Okay, so everything's great in Northern Ireland, but because the government and industry are doing it right, the question, I guess, for you guys is, how does that work? How should that work? And maybe just to give you a thought as you ponder that one, and then we get to jobs versus work, is when President Xi did his New Year's speech this year, behind him on his bookshelf, some eagle-eyed people spotted there were two books on AI, one about the master algorithm and one augmented life in the smart lane. So you know, what should governments be doing? According to Vladimir Putin, the nation that leads in AI will rule the world. That's a direct quote, I'm told. I don't read Russian, but still, you can believe it, can't you? Mm-hmm. So, are governments a good force here, a bad force? Should they be in or out?
I think governments are a good force when it's focused, when they're focused, and clearly governments are looking to, you know, we mentioned it, there is a challenge going forward. Yeah. The nature of work profiling, which has been the case from the 70s and 80s and 90s, you know, there's change is inevitable. Constant change is inevitable, and therefore we have to adapt with it. And governments know that they need to change the structure, the demographic, the profile of their workforce. So working with industry in a sensible way is a good thing. And it's a good thing, one, because it facilitates investment, two, because it facilitates a lens that says this is very important to us as a country, and we want skilled people as such to do so. So we know in Singapore, data science, it's, you know, it's very important. The Singapore government is promoting it through STEM to be a fintech hub. There's sort of two comments I'd just make on the educational side. One is the aspect of bringing new talent, graduate talent, postgraduate talent in and to use it, which is fantastic because young minds, very enthusiastic, breaking down barriers, and that is really good. Having that enthusiasm percolating through an organization is priceless. The second aspect then also, when we look at something like AI, and we were talking about it at the beginning, so if resource is expensive and it's scarce, then you can work with academic institutions to help percolate that capability. We are working with a consortium called Brainpool, and they are academic institutions from Harvard, MIT, Stanford, Cambridge, Oxford, and they give, you know, they have 200 machine learning engineers, AI engineers, who are at the cutting edge of AI. They're not tied to our technology at all, but they're the cutting edge, and what they do is work on projects and percolate those techniques that they are working on daily and researching through, one, our organization, but also to our clients. And I think that tightly coupled sort of pincer movement is really a great way to facilitate that.
David, what about this jobs versus work thing? Which is which, I think, is the question.
Yeah, I'm not sure about the focus of the question, but what we're seeing, I don't know if you want to explain that.
Well, let me try.
Yeah.
Here's the way I think of it. My son's doing his PhD at University of Cambridge in biological physics. He's trying to help researchers understand how to use massive amounts of data to better improve drug discovery. He does that. He's currently diving in Malaysia at the moment. Then he's going to go on a different dive trip. So he carries his laptop with him, and he runs huge amounts of computation, and he does that basically from wherever he sits. So his work is around building systems, and basically his supervisor for his PhD says, check in, let us know how things are going, and I continue to say, boy, I definitely took a wrong turn somewhere in life because I worry about trying to go to somewhere for a meeting. So when I think about work, I think about output, I think about achievement. A job is something that I think will continue to diminish.
Let me just supplement on that. I think that brings into the point about how important in terms of the working environment is going forward. This whole thing about flexible working is actually very important as you move forward. Diversity, just talked about, is actually very important to create that environment to embrace and work together with new technology and the way we work going forward.
Let me supplement the supplement, because the way that I think about it is...
And then I'll come back to you, because it was you.
Flexible working for me is nothing, right? I mean, I'm not terribly interested or disinterested on whether somebody can work from home on a Friday afternoon. I think the bigger evolution is how do you define some contribution or some output or some result or some impact, whatever way you want to think of it. So I think if the idea is, I used to sit in my office and now I can go and do that by dialing in and, you know, having some connection through the team with a conference call, that's okay. I think the bigger evolution is going to be, I do what, for whom, and it has what value. And you can do that in whatever way. So I think the bigger evolution, I mean, I think we represent this sort of bridge which says, okay, how do I make it easier for people to feel like they're a part of a team? But I think the bigger one is, I doubt my son will ever go to a place that there is a defined work. He goes to the lab essentially to have a coffee with friends, and then he takes off again. His biggest concern is whether he has enough compute power in his laptop, and does he have the connection that allows him to get back to the cloud.
So David, Vincent's got it all wrong worrying about this robot, doesn't he?
I think he's got it wrong worrying about the robot right now, yeah.
It's not going to be in his office. It's going to be somewhere in Malaysia.
But even lawyers are starting to think very much on that freelance basis. You know, we have a hub of freelance lawyers that we're using. But you could see that the future, and maybe it's a near future, legal services provider won't be a law firm with a great big load of offices, with a load of employed people and a big technology budget. It'll be an aggregator, an assembler of people on a project-by-project basis by bringing in freelance professionals on the legal side, by aggregating a piece of technology and maybe using its own IP-protected process to deliver a project for a client. So even the organisation itself, quite apart from the people working with it rather than for it, will undergo radical change.
Okay. So have we got one last question? We got three questions. Maybe we take all three and see if we can get them in, but we're up against it as we run down to the end. So could you just give us succinctly your question, and then the next one here and here?
Sure, it's a quick one. A lot of big things have been said about AI and how it could go out of control. Certainly Stephen Hawking, who just passed away, said it could be the biggest threat to mankind. So should we have some social, political or legal restraints on the development of AI and restrictions on what it can do? Do we risk being taken over by Skynet and eradicated by robots that look like Arnold Schwarzenegger?
Rise of the robots, how do we control them? What's the question down the front here?
Hello. These days we're talking about AI and robots and big data, lots of things. So I have a question for the panel speakers. As an entrepreneur or as a college students or as a fresh graduates, what sorts of studies or learning we should do so that we can be better prepared to meet the new challenges ahead of us?
So as the robots come, what should we be teaching our children or encouraging them to look at? And last question.
Yeah, my question deals mainly with the same thing, except that I think radical reform in education is actually holding back AI. And that maybe I might ask the panel whether you feel that the business community needs to embrace the universities much more, just like Eindhoven has done, to build the partnerships so that STEM becomes a sexy subject.
Okay, thank you.
Can I pick up the law about AI?
Yeah.
Can we have a general law or restriction or regulation for prohibiting or restricting the use of AI? I think the genie is out the bottle, and I think we have great enough difficulty agreeing a global standard for protection of personal data, and trying to persuade all nations to rein in their AI efforts and to restrict them to a particular zone would be a rather futile effort, even though we might all rather prefer that.
But it's futile, but don't we need to do it?
It's
time for a futile gesture.
Who's the we? I mean, how do we try and have, is the United Nations going to be the convening body that says, here's what we all subscribe to? So I don't disagree that some rules of the road would be helpful, but I think everybody understands it will affect everything. It will affect everything. So the question is, the race to dominance is a natural sort of human instinct. So I'm curious, not whether I agree or disagree about whether it's a good idea to have a rule of the road, but to whom are we turning when we say we ought to have some sort of guidelines?
And I think, just to respond to that, I don't disagree with that. I think what is happening already, and I touched on previously about self-regulatory organizations, there are a few of them today already, and where people are trying to reach consensus just around some basic principles, not so much about the rules in terms of the development of AI. I think that's a good, it's a good start, it's a good journey. Yeah.
Okay. And this question about the skills, what should we be, if there are all these machines, all these algorithms, everything there, what do we do? What do you think, Martin?
I think the universities need to open their classes of Phuket and PP. And they need to be teaching everyone of how to use their laptops on a beach.
I think you have to be, certainly you have to be numerate. I think if you don't have some understanding of math, right? Yeah. So I don't think everybody has to be a programmer or a coder, but I think the idea that you have to understand the tool sets that are around you to have some conversancy is critical, and I think this idea of understanding where you place value. So there's no doubt that if you think of medical, AI will play a huge role in the future of health. It doesn't mean that the doctor sitting in front of the patient and discussing something terribly difficult and emotional with the patient will ever change. No. But the tools that are informing that discussion will certainly change. So I think everybody has to think not about, I'm learning this job, I'm an accountant. For sure, paralegals are gone, will be gone. Because we know half a dozen startups that are working to make sure that they're gone.
And equally fundamentally, you know, we're all talking. I mean, we're all interacting. So services, communication, relationships, that's what makes the human race, you know, that's what makes us what we are. The thing around services will not go away. It's going to change shape, as it has done over the last 40, 50 years.
So understanding your role in these things, as opposed to learning a trade, if you will, I think is very important.
Well, you touched on this with the soft skills, didn't you? And
I agree with Martin's point, first of all. I mean, the nature of services and how services can deliver much greater value going forward and creating this 1.7 trillion, new GDP going forward. But to the point about, training and education, I actually think the way we should think is we should be teaching and training our people where machines cannot learn. So things like empathy, values you talked about, these are areas that's critical for us to go down this journey, I think.
Can I offer just I know we're timed, but here's the quick thing that we try and say when we speak about it in front of students, is the more narrowly defining you have your scope, the more likely you are to be replaced. Because people used to think that the way to, quote, survive in this evolution is to be super niche. But the answer is, kind of building on what Raymond was saying, the more that something is narrowly defined, go get me all of the case law on this topic over the last 40 years, we can build a system that can do that. What we cannot build is this idea of artificial general intelligence, something that is wide-ranging and has a number of different angles. So if somebody says, let me learn bookkeeping, that's gone. Let me learn this aspect, that will be gone. So if there's advice to kids, it's try and be conversant in enough different areas as opposed to the idea that you're super specialized in a niche. The more narrowly defined, the more it's easy to build a system to disintermediate.
Okay, so maybe that's where we need to wrap up, and it's the idea Renaissance man and woman is maybe what we should be aiming for, and think about the things you don't want to get from a machine. Those are the things that no one else will want to get from a machine, and those are the skills you should build, maybe. Look, we are out of time. I think we could have gone on for a lot longer with this, but let me finish by thanking the panelists who've been giving us a great contribution here. First of all, Raymond Chow, Chairman, CEO of PwC for Asia Pacific and Greater China. Then Steve Leonard, founding CEO, SG Innovate from Singapore. Martin Haynes, Managing Director for Asia for First Derivatives, but also from Northern Ireland, don't forget. And David Halliwell, Director of Knowledge and Innovation Delivery, Pinsent Masons. Thanks very much, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you. That was good.
you.